So, my roommate Tessa and I had this big idea to throw a Friendsgiving this year. Both of us were stuck in the city, and a lot of our mutual friends couldn't make it home for the holidays either, so it felt like a perfect excuse to throw a party. We hyped each other up about it for weeks, talking about everything we'd do, the decorations, the food, the atmosphere. Tessa and I were basically imagining this Instagram-perfect setup. Candles, homemade dishes, laughter, and a cozy vibe. After some back and forth, we decided to split up the tasks. I would handle the guest invites, appetizers, and desserts, and she'd take care of the main meal and the decorations. She seemed way more into the ambient side of things than I was anyway, so I thought it was a win-win. We both had this unspoken understanding that the other would go all out, no questions asked. A few days before the party, we hadn't talked much about our plans, but I'd seen Tessa browsing Pinterest for Thanksgiving table settings and ordering a few things online. I figured that was all taken care of. Meanwhile, I got swamped with work, but I still managed to pick up a few easy, pre-made appetizers and a couple of box pies. I'll admit, I didn't go all out on the food. I figured the important part was just getting people together, right? And Tessa had sounded so invested in making everything look perfect that I assumed her enthusiasm would carry us through. The day of Friendsgiving arrives, and people start showing up around 7. I'd arranged some of the pre-made appetizers on plates, poured chips into a bowl, and was just setting out the store-bought pies when I noticed the decorations Tessa had put up, which is to say, there were none, not even a tablecloth. There was just a bare table with a single pumpkin she'd found in the pantry, and, I kid you not, a few plastic forks tossed in the middle like a centerpiece. "Tessa," I hissed, "where's all the stuff? I thought you were handling the decorations." She looked at me with genuine surprise and said, I thought you were going to pick some things up. I was focused on the main dish." She pointed toward the kitchen, where I saw a sad-looking casserole and a store-bought rotisserie chicken she'd picked up from the grocery store. That was it. There was no turkey, no stuffing, no mashed potatoes, none of the actual Thanksgiving stuff we planned. At that moment, I realized we were in deep trouble. People were already mingling, asking where they could put their coats, and eyeing the sad spread with forced smiles. I pulled Tessa into the kitchen, barely keeping my frustration in check. "Tessa, what happened to all those plans you had? The Pinterest boards? The table settings?" She looked equally annoyed. "I thought you'd take care of the decorations if I was doing the main course. You didn't even make dessert. Those pies are straight from a box." I felt my face flush. "Well, yeah, I was busy, and I thought you were handling the atmosphere. We split the duties, remember?" She scoffed. "We split the duties, but that doesn't mean I have to do everything just because you didn't feel like it." The kitchen was too small for this argument, and our voices were rising, catching the attention of a few friends who were clearly trying to pretend they didn't hear us. I took a deep breath and said, "Look, let's just salvage this. We can still make it work." But I couldn't shake my irritation. She'd had the time to plan this out, hadn't she? We both grudgingly returned to the party, silently shoving food onto plates and throwing on a random playlist to fill the awkward silence. People tried to be polite, saying, "Wow, this is so casual," and giving us sympathetic looks like they understood what had happened, even if we didn't. But here's the thing. As the night dragged on, the resentment between us only grew. Every time I saw someone poke around looking for utensils or pass on a dried-out piece of casserole, I felt a pang of annoyance at Tessa, like somehow she'd sabotaged the night by not putting in enough effort. And every time she looked at me, I could see her barely masked frustration, like she wanted to say, "How could you let me down like this?" At one point, we were cleaning up some spilled wine when she muttered, "If you'd actually cared, maybe this would have been a real Friendsgiving." I lost it. "Are you kidding? You're the one who didn't bring half the stuff you promised. Maybe if you didn't spend so much time scrolling through Pinterest, you would have actually planned something." People definitely heard that one. I saw a few guests exchange awkward glances, suddenly finding their drinks very interesting. The night ended with everyone quietly slipping out way earlier than planned. As soon as they were gone, Tessa and I sat there in silence, surrounded by the leftovers of what should have been a great night. Eventually, she muttered something about needing to do everything herself next time, and I, just as defensively, shot back that maybe I wouldn't even be around to help. She stormed off to her room, and I ended up sitting there alone, replaying everything. Part of me knew that I could have done more. But at the same time, she could have put in a little more effort too, right? She dropped the ball on the whole ambience she claimed to care so much about, and I felt like I was left cleaning up her mess. Now I'm stuck wondering if I was the one who messed up here. AITA? It was my sister, Kara, who unknowingly dragged me into it. She's always been the type to handle everything herself, no drama, no complaints. But lately, she'd seemed frazzled, distracted, like she was carrying this invisible weight. I brushed it off as stress from her new promotion and didn't think too much of it until one night when I stopped by her place after work. I wasn't supposed to be there. We were supposed to meet for dinner, but she'd forgotten and was still at home in her sweats when I arrived. She looked tired, her usually tidy living room a mess. We hugged, and I made a joke about how she'd let herself go, which got a weak laugh out of her. Then, while she was in the kitchen grabbing a drink, my eyes drifted to her coffee table. There was an envelope there, slightly open, with a stack of medical bills inside. The top one had overdue stamped in red, and the amount due was, well, let's just say it was steep. A shiver of concern went through me. I knew Kara had been dealing with some medical stuff, but I'd had no idea it was this serious or this expensive. And knowing her, she wouldn't ask for help even if she was drowning. When she came back, I gently asked, "Hey, are you all right with all this medical stuff?" I saw the bills, and it looks like things have gotten pretty heavy. She froze, eyes going sharp. "You were looking through my things?" No, I just saw them sitting there, I swear." I held up my hands defensively. "I'm only asking because I'm worried about you. I didn't mean to pry." She let out a frustrated sigh, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Look, I'm handling it okay. I don't need you swooping in like you're here to fix everything. I'm not some charity case." Her words stung. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I didn't mean it like that, Kara. I know you, and you never asked for help. If there's something I could do, anything, I want to be there for you." Her expression hardened. "Well, maybe I don't want help. Maybe I just want to deal with things on my own without you meddling." I felt myself getting defensive. "It's not meddling if I care about you. You shouldn't have to go through this alone, but you're making it sound like I'm some nosy intruder. I was just trying to be there for you." "Well, I don't need you to be there for me," she shot back. "Not like this. I can handle my own life. Thank you very much." I looked down, the reality of her words hitting me hard. I'd always thought I was doing the right thing by looking out for her, but now it seemed like I'd only made things worse. There was this thick silence between us, and suddenly the room felt too small, too tense. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her see that I wasn't trying to control her or question her independence. I just didn't want her to struggle alone. But it was clear she wasn't going to let me in. Finally, I muttered, "I'm sorry, Kara. I didn't mean to overstep." She just nodded, barely looking at me, her arms crossed tightly. I left soon after, feeling like I'd crossed a line I hadn't even realized was there. On the drive home, I felt this sinking feeling in my chest, wondering how I'd misread things so badly. I was only trying to be a good sibling, but apparently I'd gone about it all wrong. I kept going over it in my head, questioning everything. Should I have just kept my mouth shut? Was it wrong to offer help, even if she was clearly struggling? In my mind, I was just being a concerned brother, trying to do right by her. But now I'm not so sure. So here I am, left with nothing but this guilt, wondering if I'd actually made things worse by even bringing it. I'll own it, maybe I could have handled things differently. But honestly, I was just over it. For years, my family's been on this mission to keep traditions alive, which in their eyes means I'm expected to show up at every gathering, holiday, and random family get-together without fail. It doesn't matter what I have going on or how much I need a break. They expect me there. And every time I push back, they act like I'm burning the family tree to the ground. The most recent drama was over our annual family Thanksgiving extravaganza, which has somehow grown to a full weekend of activities, traditions, and the same group of people retelling the same stories for the 100th time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against Thanksgiving itself, but 2 straight days of forced socializing, same old stories, and running errands to make it all happen? I'm just not up for it anymore. I've been feeling pretty burned out, and what I really wanted was a quiet, relaxing weekend alone. I've been talking with some friends about going on a solo hiking trip. Just me, the mountains, and a chance to clear my head. I knew it'd be therapeutic, especially after a year of work stress, and I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I kept it quiet, figuring I'd let my family know closer to the date so they wouldn't try to talk me out of it. But the week before Thanksgiving, my mom called to check in on the details. She launched into the list of who was bringing what dish, what time we'd be expected to help set up, and how I'd be in charge of wrangling the kids during the football game. That was it for me. I told her straight up, I'm not coming this year. I'm taking some time for myself. Silence. Then, predictably, the waterworks started. But you've never missed Thanksgiving, she said, her voice cracking. This is what family is all about. She started going on about how my absence would ruin the weekend and how everyone would be asking where I was. And yeah, maybe she got to me a little. But when I hung up, I felt more certain than ever that I needed to stick to my plans. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just choosing to prioritize my own mental health for once. Naturally, word spread. My phone started blowing up with messages from my siblings, my aunts, even my cousins. Everyone had an opinion. One of my aunts, who's always been the family guilt tripper, sent me this long text about how family is all you have in the end, and how I was selfish for putting my whims before the family's traditions. My dad, usually the more laid-back one, called and said he was disappointed in me. He said they needed all hands on deck for the cooking and setup, and my absence was going to leave a huge hole. I almost laughed. How can one person missing Thanksgiving ruin the entire thing? But to them, I guess it was just unthinkable that I wouldn't be there. Thanksgiving rolled around, and while they were all neck-deep in turkey prep, I was sitting on top of a mountain, taking in the sunrise completely alone. It was the most peace I'd felt in years. I spent the entire day hiking, taking photos, just letting my mind relax for the first time in forever. For once, I didn't have to worry about small talk, awkward family conversations, or playing the role of the good kid just because it was expected of me. I got back to the cabin I'd rented, had my own little meal, and curled up with a book, feeling totally content. Of course, when I turned my phone on the next morning, I had a flood of missed calls and messages. There were a few happy Thanksgiving texts, but most of it was just passive-aggressive jabs and guilt trips. My mom had sent a picture of the family around the table with a sad little caption, "Wish you were here." My brother sent a single text, "I hope it was worth it." My sister's message read, "Everyone was asking about you." And Mom looked like she was about to cry all night. "Hope you're happy." Later, I found out they'd spent a good portion of the meal talking about me, how I'd bailed on the family, how selfish I'd become, and how they never expected this from me. My aunt even took it upon herself to explain my absence to everyone, saying I was going through a phase and would come around eventually. It was embarrassing to hear that they'd turned my decision into some kind of crisis that took center stage at the family table. The kicker? My mom called me the next day, and I could hear the hurt in her voice as she asked me, "Why couldn't you just be with us? Why wasn't family enough for you this year?" I didn't have the heart to tell her that I'd felt more at home in the quiet of the mountains than I had in any family gathering for years. I just told her that I needed a break, that it wasn't personal, but that didn't really seem to land. Now, the family chat is still full of little digs. "Hope you had a relaxing weekend. And can we expect you for Christmas? Or will you need more alone time?" It's clear they're upset, and honestly, I know it hurt them. But it also felt freeing to finally do what I wanted, without bending to everyone else's expectations. I can't tell if that makes me a terrible person, or just someone who finally took a stand for what they need. My little sister Lily had been struggling with her college applications all year. She's always been the perfectionist in the family, the type to stay up late rewriting papers just for one more point. This past semester, I watched her work herself into a frenzy, balancing homework, part-time work, volunteering, and on top of that, preparing applications to all her dream schools. She was stressed, sleep-deprived, and way too hard on herself. She wouldn't accept any help. She kept brushing me off whenever I offered, saying she could handle it. But I remember what it was like. I graduated 3 years ago, and college apps had me in knots. So I figured I'd step in and take a bit of that weight off her shoulders. I knew she wouldn't ask for help directly, but I thought maybe, just maybe, if I could get a few of the logistics sorted for her, it might ease her stress. One evening after dinner, I snuck into her room while she was out and took a look at her application checklist. It was chaos. Sticky notes with scribbled deadlines, half-finished drafts, and random reminders scattered everywhere. I spent the next few hours organizing her documents, writing out a neat schedule of deadlines, and gathering together all the recommendation letters she'd been stressing about. I even filled out some of the generic personal info sections on a couple of online applications. Just the boring stuff, nothing big, thinking she'd appreciate it later. After putting in all that effort, I felt genuinely proud, thinking she's going to be so relieved. So I waited until she got home, trying to act casual. I told her, "Hey Lily, I went through some of your applications and organized everything. I filled out some sections to save you time too. Now you can focus on the important stuff, like your essays." She just stared at me for a second, looking absolutely stunned. Then, to my shock, she looked furious. "You did what?" she nearly yelled, her face turning red. I tried to explain. "I just organized everything. I didn't touch anything you wrote. I just filled in some of the basic information and made a list of deadlines, so you wouldn't have to keep track of it all on your own." But she was having none of it. "You went through my things without even asking. Do you have any idea how personal this is? You basically went through my entire life, my dreams, my plans, my essays. I feel completely violated." The word violated stung. All I wanted was to make things easier for her, to give her some breathing room, so she wouldn't feel so overwhelmed. "Lily, I was just trying to help," I said, feeling the sting of her anger. "You're obviously super stressed, and I thought if I could take care of the boring parts, you'd have more time to focus on what matters to you." But she wouldn't let it go. "You don't understand. These are my applications. I'm the one who's supposed to be in control. I don't need you barging in and doing things for me, treating me like I can't handle my own stuff. This is a huge violation of my privacy." By now, I was completely floored. "Lily, I didn't read anything personal. I was just filling out the basics, stuff like your name, address, high school. It wasn't anything private. I just thought it would help." Her hands were clenched, and she looked ready to scream. "I don't care if you didn't read my essays. You still went through my things without asking. You think just because you're my sister, you can decide what's best for me." I felt a wave of frustration building up because, honestly, I didn't see what was so awful about what I'd done. It wasn't like I'd changed her applications or tried to rewrite anything. "Lily, I know you're stressed. You're always talking about how much work this is, and I just wanted to lighten your load a little." But she just glared at me, arms crossed. "If I need help, I'll ask for it. I don't need you trying to control my life, all right? You always act like you know what's best, and it's infuriating. Maybe I'm stressed, but that doesn't mean you get to swoop in and treat me like a little kid." It hurt to hear her say that, especially since I was only trying to be supportive. I thought I was doing her a favor, stepping in where she seemed overwhelmed. But now she was making me out to be some kind of controlling, overbearing sibling. I wanted to shout, "If you can't even appreciate someone trying to help you, maybe you deserve to be stressed." But I bit my tongue. I knew saying that would just make things worse. In the end, she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. I thought I was helping her, that my intentions would be obvious. I'd spent hours on her applications, trying to organize everything to make her life easier. And instead, she was acting like I'd committed some huge betrayal. It's been days, and she's barely speaking to me. I'm stuck wondering if maybe I really overstepped, or if she's just overreacting because of the stress. I thought family was supposed to support each other, and that's all I wanted to do. But now, I'm left feeling like a villain just for trying to help. So, about 2 months ago, my younger brother Jack reached out to me. He was in a rough spot, had just broken up with his girlfriend, left their shared apartment, and was between jobs. He'd been couch surfing for a while and was getting desperate. Now, Jack and I have always had our differences. He's got a bit of a free spirit, let's say, and I've always been the responsible older sibling type. But family is family, right? I figured I could help him out for a few weeks, give him a stable place to get back on his feet. I set up the guest room, made sure he had clean sheets and towels, stocked up on some of his favorite snacks, really tried to make him feel welcome. When he arrived, he was genuinely grateful, gave me a big hug, and promised he'd be gone in a couple weeks max. The plan was for him to find a job, save up a bit, and eventually get his own place. He was enthusiastic, telling me how he was going to turn things around, and I thought, okay, this might actually work. For the first week, everything seemed fine. He'd wake up early, get dressed, and head out with his laptop, saying he was hitting up job interviews and making connections. I was happy to hear it. At home, he'd wash his dishes, keep his room tidy, even help with a few chores. We'd catch up over dinner, and he'd tell me about all the leads he was following up on. I really thought he was on the right track. But by week 2, things took a turn. Suddenly, he wasn't waking up until noon. He'd hang around in his pajamas, scrolling through his phone or playing video games. When I asked him how the job hunt was going, he'd mumble something about how he was waiting to hear back from places. I suggested looking into some side gigs in the meantime, but he just sighed and said, "Those are dead-end jobs. I'm trying to build a career here." And it wasn't just his attitude about work that started to change. My apartment gradually transformed into Jack's personal mess zone. He'd leave dirty plates all over the kitchen, abandon half-empty coffee mugs in random places, and leave piles of laundry on the couch. I'd ask him to clean up, and he'd say, "Yeah, sure, later," but later never came. When I reminded him, he'd act like I was nagging, rolling his eyes or sighing heavily. I told myself he was just adjusting and try to be patient. By week 3, Jack seemed fully at home in a way that left me feeling displaced. He was spreading out all over the apartment, using my toiletries, raiding the pantry, and taking over the living room to watch TV late into the night. There was one night when he blasted a movie until almost midnight, and when I asked him to turn it down, he laughed and said, "Come on, it's just one night." One night turned into several. I had to remind him to buy his own food after he went through 2 boxes of cereal and ate half my weekly groceries. His response? "I'll get you back when I get a job." One day, I came home to find Jack hosting a couple of his buddies in the living room. They were laughing, eating pizza, and making themselves comfortable. I hadn't even met these friends before, and there they were, lounging in my space, and Jack didn't see a problem with it. When I asked him if he could at least check with me before bringing people over, he rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, relax, it's just a couple of friends." That night, I finally told him we needed to talk. I asked about his progress with job applications, and he shrugged, saying, "It's rough out there." I suggested he consider retail or something in the meantime, just to get a paycheck coming in. He cut me off, saying he wasn't going to stoop that low. I tried to be as gentle as possible, but explained that he'd need to start pulling his weight if he wanted to stay here longer. Jack got defensive, accusing me of not supporting him when he was at his lowest. He said, "Not everyone can be as lucky as you. Some of us actually struggle," implying I'd somehow had it easy because I have a steady job and a nice place. I was stunned. I reminded him that I'd worked hard to get here, and that I'd let him stay so he could have a chance to do the same. But he kept going, saying I didn't understand, that I was rubbing my success in his face by making him feel like he was freeloading. After that, the tension just simmered. Jack would barely speak to me, doing the absolute minimum around the house. He'd still spend hours on my couch, scrolling through his phone or playing games, making no effort to improve his situation. It was like he'd given up on trying, and also on being remotely considerate. My fridge was always half empty. He'd leave clothes in the bathroom, and he never cleaned anything up without being asked. The final straw came one evening when he used my car without asking. He took my keys off the hook and left for several hours. When he came back, I asked him not to take my car without permission, and he threw his hands up and said, "Wow, so now you're policing everything I do?" I told him that it wasn't working out, that I needed him to start considering other places to stay. He just looked at me, eyes full of resentment, and said, "Unbelievable. You act like you care, but the second it gets inconvenient, you just want me gone. Family, huh?" Now he's avoiding me, barely speaking, and it feels like there's this heavy silence between us. I didn't expect it to end like this, with him acting like I'm the villain when all I did was try to help him. Part of me thinks he's just hurt, but another part of me feels like he's been taking advantage of my kindness from the start. So now I'm sitting here wondering if maybe I am in the wrong, or if he's just pushing my limits to see what he can get away with. Alright, let me set the scene. My cousin Jess is getting married, and it's going to be the wedding of the year. The whole extended family's been buzzing about it for months. She's the golden child of the family, and her fiancé, Mark, is this all-around great guy. Jess put me in charge of coordinating a little family day before the wedding, kind of a low-key gathering, so everyone could get to know each other better, break the ice before the big day. She was clear about what she wanted. A simple picnic by the lake, bring your own lunch style, nothing fancy. The idea was for everyone to just relax and chat. And Jess really wanted it to be a peaceful, family-only event. She knows that our family can be a bit extra, so she was hoping a picnic would keep things chill. But when she described it to me, all I could think was boring. See, I'm the fun cousin. I'm the one everyone turns to for planning exciting outings, organizing parties, that kind of thing. The thought of sitting around in a park, nibbling on sandwiches in silence, sounded like a waste of a perfectly good Saturday to me. So I figured I'd spice things up a bit. Not a full overhaul, just a few tweaks. Nothing wrong with making it a little more memorable, right? So instead of the usual park, I booked us a spot at this outdoor adventure place a little way out of town. It's basically like a mini amusement park, but with nature. There's zip lining, an obstacle course, paddle boats, and all these other activities. I figured everyone could do whatever they felt comfortable with, and then we'd all meet up at the picnic tables afterward to eat and chat. I thought it was a pretty brilliant compromise. Fun for all ages, with the same picnic vibe Jess wanted. I didn't exactly clear this with Jess. I knew she'd probably worry, but I figured once everyone got there and saw how fun it was, she'd relax. Plus, I didn't think anyone would mind spending a little extra for the entrance fee. I mean, it's a wedding weekend. A few bucks for a unique experience shouldn't be a big deal, right? Well, the day arrived, and I was pretty pumped to show everyone this place. But the minute people started arriving, I could tell things weren't going exactly as I'd planned. My Aunt Carol looked around, totally bewildered, and was like, "Oh, is this the right place? I thought we were having a picnic." I smiled and said, "We are, but with some fun options. Look, they have zip lining. How cool is that?" Then Jess showed up with Mark, and let's just say her expression didn't exactly scream excited. She pulled me aside, yelling, "What is this? We were supposed to be by the lake, where people could relax." I tried to reassure her, saying, "Jess, relax. This will be way more memorable than some boring park. Everyone's going to have a blast. Trust me." She didn't look convinced, but since we were already there and people were getting into the groove, she let it go. Well, sort of. I noticed her keeping an eye on everything, looking more tense than I'd ever seen her. Things took an awkward turn pretty quickly. My grandma, bless her, took one look at the zip line and was ready to go back to the car. She'd brought her lawn chair and a book, thinking she could just sit and relax by the lake. When I told her there was no lake here, she just shook her head and muttered something under her breath. My cousin's husband tried the rock climbing wall, slipped, and scraped his arm. Cue my Aunt Carol running around looking for Band-Aids. Even Jess's future in-laws didn't seem too thrilled. They brought their little dog, expecting a quiet picnic, and now the poor pup was hiding under the picnic table with all the noise and excitement around. Still, I figured once everyone had some food, they'd settle down and realize it wasn't such a bad idea. I'd arranged for a food truck to stop by, thinking it'd be easier and more exciting than everyone bringing their own lunch. I'd even chosen a taco truck because, come on, who doesn't love tacos? When I announced it, though, Jess's eyes widened like I'd just announced we were getting married at a drive-thru. Everyone was supposed to bring their own food, she hissed. Some people might have dietary restrictions, allergies. Did you even think of that? At that point, I was getting a little annoyed myself. Come on, Jess, it's tacos. I'm just trying to make this fun for everyone. You don't need to be so stressed. It's your wedding weekend, after all. Loosen up? That was the wrong thing to say. Jess just shook her head and walked away, leaving me standing there feeling like I'd somehow ruined her whole day. But here's the thing. People were actually having fun. The kids were laughing and running around, my cousins were trying out the paddle boats, and my uncles were sitting around drinking beer and chatting. It wasn't as if anyone was miserable. Well, except for maybe Jess and her fiancé, who both stayed near the picnic tables with a couple of my more laid-back relatives. I thought everyone else was having a great time, but every time I looked over, Jess was either checking her watch or glaring at me. Finally, just as everyone was finishing up, Jess called me over. She looked exhausted and just said, "I know you meant well, but you didn't even consider what I wanted. I asked for something small and relaxing. This was way over the top. I just wanted us to have some quiet family time, not an adventure park." I tried to defend myself, but everyone was having fun. This was way better than just sitting around on the grass doing nothing. I thought this would be the kind of thing people would remember. Jess sighed and just said, "Well, they'll remember it, all right. But that's not the point." She walked off, and I could tell she was disappointed in me. And that hurt because I really thought I'd put in the effort to make this day special. Now, everyone keeps making little comments like, "Next time, maybe we'll stick to the original plan," or "Not every event needs to be a spectacle." Even my grandma made a joke about bringing her own chair to the wedding in case it's at a skate park or something. I'm honestly a bit baffled. I know I changed things up a little, but was it really that bad? I just wanted the day to be fun and memorable for everyone, especially Jess. I thought she'd appreciate the extra effort and creativity. Instead, she acted like I'd wrecked her entire wedding weekend. I mean, I didn't drag everyone to an actual amusement park. It was just a fun outdoor place. So, alright, here's the deal. My girlfriend, Katie, and I had this camping trip planned with a group of friends. Something we've been looking forward to for weeks. I don't usually go camping. I'm more of a prefer my bed kind of guy, but Katie loves the outdoors and really wanted to make a weekend of it. And hey, I figured why not? I'd get to see her in her element. And if nothing else, I'd be out in nature with a great group. But as the trip got closer, I started to notice that Katie had a lot of ideas about how this trip should go. She started listing off hikes she wanted to do, early morning yoga sessions by the lake, meals she was already planning to make for everyone because you just can't trust anyone else to handle the campfire cooking, and even a schedule for screen-free bonding activities every night around the fire. I could already tell she was planning to have us up at dawn and doing something every hour of the day. I'm more of a laid-back guy when it comes to vacations. To me, camping means chilling in a hammock, maybe fishing, definitely taking naps. So I tried gently reminding Katie that not everyone might want the full itinerary approach. She gave me this look, kind of like I'd suggested we ditch the whole trip. "Come on," she said. "You're the one who's always saying you're down for whatever. I thought you'd love this stuff. Trust me, it'll be fun." But that wasn't exactly down for whatever in my book. Still, I figured I'd just roll with it and that we'd end up finding a happy medium. Then, the night before we left, Katie called to go over her plan again, ticking through it like she was leading a corporate retreat. I finally snapped. "Katie, can we just go? Without all the scheduling?" She sighed, clearly annoyed. "Well, if no one takes charge, we're all going to be sitting around doing nothing. I thought you'd appreciate a little structure, especially since you're not much of a camper." And then, because I was clearly still holding on to this idea of relaxing, I made the ill-fated decision to say, "All right, I'll plan a few things myself if you're okay with that." Katie looked suspicious, but she agreed, and I took it as a victory. That night, I made my own list of activities that sounded like a lot more fun to me, the easygoing kind. Instead of early hikes and screen-free bonding, I added things like late breakfast, stargazing from hammocks, build our own s'mores with all the toppings, and of course, a whole afternoon of unscheduled chill time. When I finished, I was feeling pretty good about it. When we arrived at the campsite, I whipped out my list. I started explaining my ideas, expecting Katie to maybe meet me halfway, but she immediately looked horrified. "Wait, you mean we're not doing the morning hike? That's like half the reason we came here." And when I tried to explain that I just wanted some downtime too, she started defending each and every part of her plan. Finally, I decided to just cut to the chase. "Katie, I'm not doing your schedule. I came to camp, not to sign up for some wilderness boot camp." Katie's face turned red. "Wilderness boot camp? I thought you'd appreciate that I tried to make this special, but apparently you'd rather just laze around in a tent all day." We argued back and forth, with Katie doubling down on her itinerary and me saying I wasn't going to spend my weekend as her personal hiking apprentice. The group heard us going at it, and they slowly migrated over, probably wondering why we sounded like we were about to cancel the whole trip. Eventually, Katie just stood up, hands on her hips, and said, "Fine, you do what you want, but don't come complaining to me when you realize you're missing out." Now, maybe it was a little petty, but that line got under my skin, so I took it as a challenge. I went full steam ahead with my relaxed version of camping. I started the next day with a leisurely breakfast with a couple of friends who were in no rush, and we spent the morning relaxing by the lake, chatting and sunbathing. Meanwhile, Katie and the others were on a 5-mile hike, which looked brutal given the heat. When she got back, sweaty and looking worn out, I thought we might finally find some middle ground. But she just gave me this look, shook her head, and said, "Hope you enjoyed sleeping in." That whole afternoon, she barely spoke to me, which I thought was pretty ridiculous given the fact that she was the one insisting on the packed schedule. I tried inviting her to relax with me and the rest of the group, but she shrugged me off, saying she didn't want to miss out on all the activities she'd planned. It was like she was trying to prove a point by making herself follow her own schedule, even though everyone else seemed perfectly content. That night, while the group gathered around the campfire, Katie was still sulking and wouldn't even join in when we made esmores, muttering that it was a waste of time compared to her moonlit hike she'd planned. Some friends tried to joke with her, telling her to sit down, relax, but she just kept insisting that she had things to do. Eventually, everyone else just kind of accepted that we were camping on different planets. It was awkward, to say the least. The rest of the trip pretty much went like that. Katie sticking rigidly to her packed agenda, and me relaxing with the group. She barely looked at me half the time, and when she finally did, she only had one thing to say: "You ruined this trip." That stung. I couldn't help but think, did I ruin the trip? Or was she just refusing to compromise? She had her whole plan mapped out, but there was no room for just hanging out or seeing what the rest of us wanted to do. The whole thing felt like a control experiment where she was determined to prove that we'd all have a terrible time if we didn't follow her lead. When we got home, she went straight to her place, barely said a word, and I've been feeling this weird mix of guilt and frustration ever since. I know she wanted it to be special, but at what cost? I wanted to go camping, not to follow a schedule like we were on some summer camp field trip. So now I'm here, wondering if I should have just sucked it up and gone along with her plan, even though it felt like a military operation. All right, here goes. My girlfriend, Lila, and I are a few weeks away from starting a brand new chapter in life. We're moving to Chicago, which is a big deal, considering we've spent our whole lives in small towns. I just landed a new job there, and she's starting grad school, so it's a huge change for both of us. Now, here's the thing. I'm a planner, a born and bred, have it all figured out in advance kind of person. Moving across the country feels like a mission that needs strategy, organization, and careful execution. I mean, in Chicago, we're talking about finding an apartment, dealing with movers, switching over utilities, and all the million little tasks that could either go smoothly or descend into chaos. In my mind, if we start planning now, there won't be any surprises later. I've got lists on my phone, and I'm constantly adding things like find moving boxes or research best neighborhoods. But Lila? She has a completely different approach. Her motto is basically, let's take it step by step and let things flow. She's the kind of person who's perfectly fine not knowing where every single box is going to go or which building we'll live in until we're practically standing in front of it. In her eyes, this move is an adventure, and she wants to leave space for flexibility, to let things fall into place. She says that if we put too much pressure on planning every detail, it'll take all the fun out of it. And okay, I get it. I know she's trying to keep things light. But still, I can't shake the feeling that if we don't plan properly, we're going to land in Chicago, exhausted, lost, and wishing we'd been more prepared. So we've been trying to navigate this difference. I figured if we split up the tasks based on our strengths, that might make things easier. I told her, how about I handle logistics, like finding a place to live, coordinating movers, and all that, and you can focus on decorating and making it feel like home? Her response? A smile, with that slightly exasperated look she gets when she thinks I'm overcomplicating things. Babe, I don't want to be boxed into decorating duty, she said. This is our move. Let's just find our way together, one step at a time. We don't need 100 lists and timelines. Lila, I argued, trying to keep my frustration in check. This isn't just some weekend road trip. We can't just wing it on everything. What if we get there and something important falls through because we didn't plan? She sighed, crossing her arms, and then she gave me this look that said she was trying really hard to be patient. Trust me a little, okay? It's not like we're diving into the unknown. We're going to be fine if we don't book everything weeks in advance. We ended up in a kind of stalemate, both of us convinced that our way was the right way. For a few days, I let her approach ride. I resisted the urge to bring up things like comparing moving quotes or starting a checklist for what needed to be done once we got to Chicago. But the longer I held back, the more my anxiety built up. Every time I thought about what we hadn't done yet, I got this nagging feeling that we were putting ourselves on a collision course with a major last-minute disaster. Lila noticed, of course, She's always been able to read me like a book. She came over one night while I was working on one of my unofficial spreadsheets and set her hands on my shoulders. "I know you're stressed," she said softly, "but maybe this is a chance to try something new. Like, what if we just handled one thing at a time? We can book movers a bit later, look at neighborhoods when we're closer to the move. Just pace it out, you know?" Her words made sense in theory, but in practice, all I could think was, what if we're not ready? The thought of stepping off that plane and realizing we were unprepared was like a small terror lurking in the back of my mind. But she was trying to help, so I decided to compromise a bit. "All right," I said, half believing myself. "I'll try to pace it out and not plan every single detail. But maybe we can still lock down a few key things like the apartment?" She agreed, and for a few days, I genuinely tried to relax. I ignored my spreadsheet and let her take the lead with a more spontaneous approach. But then, as fate would have it, we got a notification that one of the few apartments we'd actually been considering had just gone off the market. Panic shot through me, and all I could think was, this is exactly what I was worried about. I showed Lila the email, hoping she'd understand why I'd been so fixated on planning. She looked at it, then shrugged. "It's just one place. There are plenty of apartments in Chicago, and besides, we've still got time. Let's see what else comes up." She smiled, but I could feel my frustration simmering. "Lila, this is why I wanted to get a head start," I said, maybe a bit too sharply. "What if this keeps happening? We'll end up stuck with whatever's left, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves." She frowned, her patience visibly thinning. "You're putting so much pressure on this. It's like you're expecting everything to go wrong unless we obsess over it. I just don't want us to turn this into a chore." And there it was, two completely different perspectives clashing again. To me, being prepared was what would give us freedom and peace of mind. To her, taking it one step at a time was how she kept it from feeling like a burden. We were trying to help each other. I could see that, but neither of us could fully accept the other's way of thinking. As the move drew closer, we kept trying to meet halfway, but honestly, it felt like both of us were constantly compromising without ever feeling fully comfortable. I agreed to ease up on my timelines, but in the back of my mind, I was still counting down the days and wondering if we'd end up scrambling. Lila, meanwhile, would occasionally sit down with me to scroll through apartment listings, even though I could tell she thought we were doing it too early. One night, I brought it up again. "Do you ever worry that this laid-back approach might backfire?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. She sighed, her expression softening. "Maybe a little, but I also worry that we'll burn out before we even get there. It's supposed to be an exciting start, not some big stress fest, you know?" She had a point. A part of me did want to just let go and enjoy the ride, to feel as excited as she did without all the dread. But letting go of the urge to control every detail felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, and I wasn't sure I could jump. So here we are now, both trying to support each other's approach, but neither fully accepting it. I'm still sneaking peeks at my checklist, and she's still gently reminding me to take things one step at a time. We're keeping the peace, but I can't shake the worry that maybe I'm right, and our one-step-at-a-time approach might come back to bite us. Or maybe I'm just too uptight and missing out on a chance to really enjoy this. Alright, so here's how things went down with my brother, Ryan, last weekend. I genuinely didn't think I was saying anything wrong, but now everyone's making me out to be the bad guy, so I'll just let you all decide. Ryan's been on this life transformation kick for the last year. New job, hitting the gym 5 times a week, getting into all sorts of healthy stuff, which cool, I'm happy for him. He's been pretty vocal about it on social media with daily workout posts, inspirational quotes, progress pics, the whole 9 yards. He even posted some before and after shots a couple months ago that got a ton of likes and comments, and I remember thinking good for him. I mean, I get it, he's proud. So anyway, our family had this barbecue at my parents' place, and Ryan showed up a little late, rolling in with his gym bag, still a little sweaty, like he'd just come from a workout. He drops this casual line like, "Sorry, I was at the gym, just didn't want to break my streak." Everyone immediately jumps into applause mode. Mom's giving him the proud mom look, and Dad's like, "That's dedication, son." Even my cousin started talking about how inspired they are by him. Now, I'm all for supporting family, but the guy has a desk job, he leaves at 5, no kids, and practically nothing tying him down. I didn't think it was that big of an achievement, to be honest. So, without even really thinking, I just said, "That's great, man." I remember back when I had to work 2 jobs and still fit workouts in somehow. Staying consistent definitely makes a difference. It was a throwaway comment, honestly, just making conversation. But he looked at me funny, and my mom quickly changed the subject. I figured he probably just didn't expect me to bring up my own experience, which, okay, fair, but it wasn't like I was trying to show him up or anything. Later, we were all sitting around eating, and someone asked Ryan about his new job at this pretty well-known tech company. He started going on about how he's been putting in all these hours and how the job has really challenged him to grow and forced him to get out of his comfort zone. Again, I get it, he's excited about his new life. But I couldn't help but think that the job itself sounded like a standard 9-to-5 gig. Meanwhile, I'm the one managing a team, pulling late nights, handling major projects. I wanted to add some perspective, you know? So I said, I know how that is. My first few years were a grind too, with late nights, last-minute deadlines, all of that. It really does force you to adapt fast. Ryan's expression didn't change much, but my mom gave me a look like, don't do this now. I ignored it though, because honestly, what's wrong with sharing a bit of my own journey? If anything, it could motivate him more, right? Ryan finished talking about his job, and my aunt asked about his wellness journey, which set him off on this whole speech about how he's changed his life around, how he's the healthiest he's ever been, and how he's never felt more productive. At that point, I couldn't help it. I said, that's great, Ryan. Health is definitely important. I remember when I was working those insane hours and still managing to hit the gym 5 days a week. It wasn't easy, but it paid off. Ryan went quiet. I thought maybe he was just out of things to say, so I tried to keep the conversation going. Yeah, balance is key, you know? You don't want to burn out. I thought he'd appreciate the advice, but he just kind of half nodded and went back to his plate, barely talking for the rest of the meal. It felt like he was pouting, and I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't trying to compete. I was just sharing my story too. But the Real kicker happened after dinner. Ryan pulled me aside, and he looked genuinely upset. He goes, you know, I get that you're proud of everything you've done, but every time I try to share something I'm excited about, you turn it into a story about you. It feels like nothing I do ever measures up in your eyes. I was honestly a little stunned. I tried to explain, Ryan, I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I'm just sharing my own experiences so you can see I understand what you're going through. I thought he'd get it, that I was only trying to relate to him, but he just shook his head and said, it's not the same. Just let me have my moment once in a while, okay? I didn't know how to respond because, in my mind, I was letting him have his moment. All I did was share my own experiences. It wasn't like I was trying to one-up him or saying his accomplishments weren't impressive. I figured we'd just had a bit of a misunderstanding, so I tried to laugh it off. Look, Ryan, I'm just saying I've been there too. I didn't realize it would bother you so much. He didn't laugh, though. He just looked at me with this tired expression and said, that's exactly it. You don't realize, and you never do. After that, he went back to talking with the rest of the family, and I was left feeling completely confused. Was I supposed to just sit there and listen to everyone act like he's the first person in the family to ever have a job or go to the gym? I mean, yes, I'm happy for him, but I've been through way harder challenges than what he's dealing with, and nobody made a big deal over that when it was me struggling. I honestly thought I was just connecting with him, showing him I understood his journey. But apparently, I can't even talk about my own experiences without it coming off as some sort of competition. Now, my mom has been sending me these guilt-trippy texts about how it wouldn't hurt to give Ryan a little more support and how not everything is about me. Which, excuse me, but it's not like I made it all about me. I just didn't sit there and keep my mouth shut. But who says that's the rule? So, now I'm left wondering if maybe I missed something, but I really don't see where I went wrong. Was it so terrible to bring up my own experiences when they were relevant to the conversation? All right, here's the story of how one loan nearly ruined my friendship with Jen. Jen and I have been friends since college, practically inseparable. She was there when I had a broken down car and no cash, so when she came to me asking for a loan, I didn't hesitate. She told me she'd hit a rough patch, needed $500 to cover rent, and promised it'd be a quick turnaround. I was a little tight on money myself, but hey, it was Jen. I trusted her. I transferred the money and told her not to stress about it. We'd figure it out when she was back on her feet. But weeks passed, then a month, and still no mention of repayment. I'd occasionally drop hints like, hey, how's work going? Everything stable? Hoping she'd bring it up. But every time, she'd get a little cagey, saying, "Things are still a bit rough, but I'm working on it." Now, I get that life can be unpredictable, so I try to be understanding. But then, I started seeing her Instagram stories filled with brunches, spa days, and these fancy-looking charcuterie boards. I didn't want to assume anything, but it fell off. Here she was posting about weekend getaways and cocktails with little umbrella straws, but meanwhile, not a word about paying me back. Finally, after another month, I decided to bring it up a bit more directly. I texted her saying, "Hey Jen, any updates on that loan? I could really use the cash back soon." She responded with a long message about how hard things had been and that she was working on it. Then she added, "Honestly, I'm really trying not to stress about everything right now. I just need some peace." I felt a mix of guilt and irritation. On one hand, she was clearly struggling. But on the other hand, my own budget was getting tight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't making any real effort to pay me back. I felt like a jerk for asking, but it was $500, not exactly something I could just forget about. Things came to a head about 2 weeks later when a group of us went out to dinner. I figured it'd be a chill night, and maybe a chance to talk with Jen in person. When the bill came, everyone started pulling out their cards to split it, and Jen didn't even hesitate. She threw her card down, saying, "I'll get this round." Everyone cheered, and I just sat there, feeling stunned. Here she was offering to treat everyone to dinner, when she couldn't pay me back $500. My patience snapped. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "Wow, Jen, so generous. Guess that loan was just a gift then?" The table went dead silent. Jen's face turned red, and she looked at me with absolute shock. She mumbled something about it being just one night, and that it wasn't a big deal. I realized right away that I'd crossed a line, but I couldn't take it back. Afterward, Jen pulled me aside, saying I'd humiliated her and made her feel like a terrible friend in front of everyone. I tried to explain that it was frustrating seeing her spend money like it was nothing while I'd been waiting months for repayment. She fired back, saying that friends don't keep score and that I should have a little faith in her. When I reminded her that it was actually my money and I was allowed to want it back, she looked at me like I was the worst person on earth. Since then, we haven't really spoken. She still hasn't paid me back, and part of me wonders if she ever will. I've heard from mutual friends that she's telling people I completely overreacted and that I shouldn't have lent her money if I was going to be petty about it. Meanwhile, I'm left wondering if maybe I shouldn't have pushed it in public, even though I feel like she's the one who put me in this situation in the first place. I swear it started as a harmless joke. In our office, everyone's always ragging on Mike. He's the type who takes everything way too seriously. Mr. Rule Follower, Mr. Don't even think about talking during a meeting. The guy's got an iron grip on his schedule, down to exactly when he'll go for his coffee, when he'll eat his lunch, even when he'll send his checking in emails to the boss. Every day, at 3 p.m. sharp, Mike has his green smoothie, and he drinks it like he's performing a solemn ritual, not a minute before or after. So one day, after watching this routine for what felt like the millionth time, I thought, why not mess with him a little? Just a small prank. I snuck into the fridge, grabbed his smoothie, and replaced it with a nearly identical bottle. Only I'd filled this one with a mix of spinach and seaweed juice I picked up at a health food store. It looked close enough, but when he'd take a sip, I knew he'd get a shock. 3 o'clock hit, and like clockwork, Mike grabs his smoothie, nods to himself, and takes a big swig. He freezes, makes this disgusted face, and gags. I'm sitting there, trying to hold back laughter as he scrambles to the kitchen to rinse his mouth out. When he came back, he glared at me. "Really? This is how you spend your time?" I laughed it off, telling him it was just a joke, but he looked genuinely rattled, muttering about immature co-workers. But hey, I thought it was funny. I mean, a little seaweed juice wasn't going to kill him. The next day, though, I was running late to work, and when I arrived, I noticed something felt off. My stapler was glued shut, my mouse barely moved across the pad, and when I sat down in my chair, it was like sliding into a sticky trap. He'd covered it with a thin layer of honey. The team was chuckling as I struggled to peel myself off, but I saw Mike at his desk, smugly typing away. Message received. Not one to back down, I upped the stakes. I knew Mike was the last person to ever skip a day of work, so I thought I'd give him a little scare. I got my hands on some official-looking HR letterhead and typed up a mock notice about potential restructuring and possible layoffs in certain departments. I left it on his desk before he arrived, complete with fake HR signatures. When he came in and saw the letter, I watched as his face went from focused to pale. He read it a few times, then stormed off to HR to demand answers. As he left, I got this weird feeling in my gut, a mix of guilt and satisfaction, because he looked terrified. And that was exactly what I wanted, right? Turns out, HR didn't find the fake letter funny. Mike came back fuming, apparently having received a stern warning about spreading workplace rumors. He was furious, and I could tell I'd crossed a line. But I didn't apologize. I couldn't let him think he'd won, or that I was sorry for what I thought was just a harmless prank. But Mike wasn't done. That afternoon, I went to log into my computer only to find a blue screen. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get past it. I called IT, only for them to inform me that someone had placed my account under security review because of suspicious activity reported on my computer. I was locked out for the day. By the time I figured out it was Mike who'd mistakenly flagged my account, I was livid. He'd interrupted my whole workday, and he didn't even try to hide that smug smile as he walked past my desk. I was fuming. In retaliation, I knew I had to go big. I noticed Mike liked keeping his personal things exactly where they were, like his favorite mug, his planner, his framed photo of his dog. So I stayed late one night, boxed up every item on his desk, and hid them around the office. The next morning, I watched from my desk as Mike arrived, scanned his barren workspace, and nearly lost it. He went around, asking everyone if they'd seen his stuff, growing more frantic as people shrugged, and eventually, he stormed into the boss's office to report theft. That got him absolutely nowhere, and he eventually pieced together that it was my doing. But instead of yelling at me, he gave me a look that sent chills down my spine and said, "You'll regret this." The next week, things escalated to a point I never saw coming. I'd scheduled a big presentation for an important client, and I'd stayed late preparing every last slide. I was ready to impress. But when I opened the presentation on Zoom the next morning, I realized something was very wrong. Each slide had been altered, with ridiculous captions and embarrassing images photoshopped in, all subtle enough to go unnoticed at first, but slowly devolving into a disaster. I tried to brush it off, improvising explanations as I went along, but my boss shot me a glare that I knew didn't bode well. I spent the entire presentation floundering, my face going hotter with every slide, the client getting visibly more uncomfortable. When it was over, my boss called me into her office. She didn't even bother hiding her disappointment, saying she'd expected more professionalism and better focus on the task. I didn't have a shred of evidence to prove it, but I knew this was Mike's revenge. I spent the rest of the week dodging sideways glances from my team, who'd all heard about my embarrassing presentation. I wanted to confront Mike, maybe even call him out in front of everyone, but he didn't give me the chance. He barely acknowledged me, just went about his work as if I was invisible. And the worst part? I started to realize that, maybe I was the one who'd gone too far in the first place. Maybe I'd been pushing him, pranking him, because he wasn't like me, because he took his work seriously and I found it amusing. I never meant to humiliate him, but I didn't stop when he was clearly uncomfortable either. In the end, Mike transferred to another department, citing a better fit for his skills. Now the team still jokes about how I ran Mike off with my pranks. They laugh, but it doesn't feel funny anymore. Looking back, I can't shake the feeling that I turned a small joke into something much uglier. And the fallout from my prank didn't just end with a sticky chair or a few laughs. It left me with an empty desk beside mine and a reputation I'd rather not have. After weeks of stewing over it, I finally got up the nerve to talk about it with my sister, who's usually the one to bring me back down to earth when I'm overthinking things. We met up for coffee, and after we exchanged the usual small talk, I just blurted it out. "Do you think I'm wrong for not going to Danny's dinner? I mean, it was just an exam celebration, right?" She gave me one of those long, knowing looks that always mean she's about to drop some hard truth. "Okay, let me ask you something," she said. "If it was your promotion party, or something big for you, would you want him there?" The question caught me off guard. My first instinct was to argue that my situation was different, that I wasn't as close with Danny as we used to be, that my life was busy, and that missing one dinner didn't erase years of history. But she didn't let me dodge. She leaned in and said, "Imagine it was a big night for you, and the one person you thought would show up just didn't." In that moment, something hit me that I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't about the dinner. It wasn't even about Danny becoming a lawyer. It was about him wanting me to show up for him, because for whatever reason he thought I mattered. He thought our connection was still real enough that it would mean something if I was there. And instead of seeing that, I just dismissed it like it was an obligation I could skip. I'd always thought that my casual approach to our family meant I was just laid back, maybe a little detached, but never hurtful. But maybe it wasn't as harmless as I believed. Maybe I'd been selfish, assuming that people would always understand if I didn't show up because I never really thought about the impact of my absence. And now, every time I look at Danny's social media, it's like he's a stranger. He's out there doing all the things we used to joke about back in the day, working long hours, arguing in court, showing up in group photos with new friends I don't know. And part of me wonders if I miss my chance to be part of that life, to have that closeness we used to share. In one last attempt to fix things, I sent him another message, just laying it all out. I told him that I was wrong, that I should have shown up, and that I'd let my own assumptions about what mattered cloud my ability to see what mattered to him. I said I understood if he needed some distance, but that I'd always be there if he wanted to reconnect. This time, he didn't reply, and I guess I can't blame him. I took his faith in me for granted, and I'm not sure how to rebuild that. In a way, it feels like I've lost not only a cousin, but a friend who'd always been quietly cheering me on, even when I didn't deserve it. Now, I'm stuck wondering if there's any way to bridge the gap I created. Part of me thinks it's a lost cause, but another part keeps holding out hope that one day he'll forgive me. Until then, I'm left wondering if this was all just a tiny mistake that got blown out of proportion, or if it was my own fault for not seeing what really mattered in the first place. So yeah. When the vet called us back into the small exam room, I already had that sick feeling, the one you get when you know something's wrong. Luna, our 8-year-old tabby, was curled up in her carrier, her eyes half closed, her body shrinking further into the soft blanket we'd brought from home. She hadn't been herself for a while, lethargic, losing weight, barely eating. When she didn't even bother batting at her favorite feather toy last week, I knew we had to take her in. The vet's voice was steady but kind as she explained Luna's diagnosis: kidney failure. It was advanced, and without intervention, she'd likely only have a few months left. But there was an option. She said a combination of surgery and long-term treatment that could help manage her condition, maybe even give her a year or two more. It wouldn't be easy, though, for any of us. Before I could respond, my husband Mark spoke up. What will her quality of life be like if we go through with it? The vet hesitated. It depends on how she responds. Some cats tolerate it well, but it's definitely taxing. You need to be prepared for a lot of vet visits, and she'd need daily subcutaneous fluids and meds. It's a big commitment, and it can be a lot for them to handle. I looked at Luna, her soft, gray tabby face peeking out from her blanket. I was already nodding, thinking about whatever arrangements we'd need to make. I wanted to give her that chance, however long it was, but Mark's face was set, his eyes focused on the floor as he listened. Once we were home, he sat me down at the kitchen table and took a deep breath. "Becca, I know how much Luna means to you. She's like family, but I'm not sure this is the right thing to put her through. She's already in pain." I opened my mouth to respond, but he kept going. "I mean, a year of fluids, medications, constant vet visits. What kind of life is that for her? She doesn't understand why she's hurting or why we're doing these things. I don't want her to be scared and miserable. I think maybe it's time to let her go peacefully." His words stung. I knew he was only saying what he thought was best, but it felt like he was giving up on her. "So, what, you think we just don't try?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just let her go, because it's hard?" Mark sighed, his face softening as he reached across the table to hold my hand. "I don't want to lose her any more than you do, but I also don't want to put her through something that's only going to add a few months of suffering. Becca, I'm worried that we're thinking about what we want, not what's best for her." I knew he had a point, but the thought of giving up, of not even trying, felt wrong. Luna had been with me for 8 years, long before Mark and I met. She'd seen me through breakups, job changes, my first apartment. She was a constant presence, my quiet, comforting friend. The idea of not fighting for her, of letting her go without doing everything I could felt like I'd be failing her. For the next few days, we were stuck in an emotional standoff. I researched everything I could find on kidney failure in cats, scouring forums, calling the vet, even reaching out to friends who'd been through something similar. I read success stories from people who said their cats had adjusted to treatment and even thrived, and each story I read only solidified my resolve. I'd sit down next to Mark with my phone, showing him story after story of cats who'd beaten the odds. But Mark wasn't convinced. "You're only reading the success stories, Becca," he'd say gently. "There are so many who don't make it or end up suffering so much. I know it's hard to hear, but we have to be realistic about what she's up against." One evening, after another tense back and forth, he looked at me, his face etched with sadness. "Becca, please, I need you to listen. I don't want us to lose her, but I'm not sure that prolonging her pain is the way to keep her with us. We're going to be making her do things she'll hate every single day. She doesn't understand any of this." I couldn't shake the feeling that he just didn't get it, though. I looked over at Luna, who was lying in her bed by the window, the last rays of sunlight warming her fur. She looked so peaceful, so unbothered, and I clung to that image, the image of her still with us, still happy. After another night of restless sleep, I finally asked Mark to come with me for one last conversation with the vet. Maybe I needed to hear the realities of the situation laid out once more, without the emotional fog clouding my judgment. The vet explained the process again, patiently going over the treatments, the medications, the likely outcomes. The treatment could buy her time, but you have to be prepared for what that means. Cats don't always respond well to the stress of constant treatment. It's difficult on them, but some owners find it's worth it if their cats adjust. She looked at me carefully. "Ultimately, you know her best. There's no right answer here, just what feels right for her and for you." On the way home, Mark stayed quiet, and I felt my own silence echoing his. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, he turned to me. "Becca, I'll support you no matter what you decide, but I need to know you're thinking about this as clearly as you can." I looked over at him, swallowing the lump in my throat. I feel like I'm failing her if I don't try, Mark. I feel like I'm letting her down." His face softened, and he took my hand. I know it feels that way, but think about who she is. Luna's happiest when she's curled up on your lap, purring, just peaceful. Can you imagine her being that happy if we're putting her through this every day?" His words cut through something in me, and for the first time, I let myself imagine what he was saying. I pictured Luna, confused and in pain, looking up at me as I tried to hold her still for yet another shot, another visit to the vet, another pill shoved into her mouth. The image filled me with dread. We went inside, and I spent the night curled up on the couch with Luna, her warm little body tucked against my chest. I could feel her breathing, steady and slow, and I wondered if I'd really been thinking of her as much as I'd thought. Was I just holding on to her because I couldn't stand the thought of letting her go? I ran my hand along her side, feeling her soft fur, her bones too close to the surface now. Her eyes flicked open, and she looked up at me with a look so full of trust that my heart felt like it was breaking in two. In the end, we decided not to go through with the treatment. We made an appointment for a week later, planning to give her a few more days of peace at home, where she was happiest. Those days were bittersweet. We spoiled her rotten, giving her all the tuna she wanted, letting her sleep on our bed every night, taking turns just lying with her, soaking in every last moment. On the morning of her final appointment, Mark held my hand the whole way to the vet's office. We stayed with her until the very end, stroking her fur, whispering to her that she was loved and safe. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing she hadn't spent her last days in confusion or pain. Now, though, I keep replaying it all in my head. Was I really thinking of her? Or did I just give up too soon? Could she have had a chance if I'd fought harder? I'll never know for sure, and that question keeps gnawing at me. So, here I am, asking AITA for letting her go, for not doing everything I could, even if it meant she might have had a little more time. When I told my best friend, Jake, that I was thinking about quitting my job to travel for a year, I half expected him to laugh it off. We've known each other since middle school, And we've been there for each other through everything: breakups, bad jobs, family drama, you name it. So I thought he'd at least try to see things from my perspective. Instead, he looked at me like I just told him I was moving to the moon. "Wait, you're serious?" he said, pushing his beer aside and staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. I'd practiced this conversation in my head a dozen times. I've been working nonstop for years, man. Saving up. I'm burnt out. And I just want, I don't know, a break? A chance to see what else is out there? He shook his head, crossing his arms. "Okay, I get that you're tired of work. We all are. But you can't just drop everything and go on some eat, pray, love journey. What about your career? Your savings? You worked so hard to get here." That's what I knew he'd say. The practical side. Jake's always been the stable one. He has a good job, a steady relationship, a house with a backyard. And I get it. He's built something solid, something he can rely on. But I'm not him. I wanted something else. I didn't even know exactly what that was, but I knew I needed to figure it out. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my tone light, "I'm not throwing my life away. I'm hitting pause. I'm in my late 20s, and I feel like I'm just drifting. I want to see the world a bit, meet new people, get out of my comfort zone. Don't you ever feel like we're just living on repeat?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I get that, I do. But there's a difference between feeling stuck and throwing everything away for some fantasy. What are you even looking for?" I hesitated, struggling to put it into words. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe that's why I need to go. To find out. I don't have it all figured out like you do. And maybe that's okay." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not about me having it all figured out. It's about making responsible choices, sticking to commitments. You got a good job, a life here. You're willing to give that up for what? Backpacking?" There it was, the disappointment creeping into his voice. And I couldn't blame him. I'd been the same person for so long. The one who stayed late at work, planned for the future, built everything carefully and cautiously. But somewhere along the way, that version of me had worn out. I felt like a stranger to myself lately, and the only way to get back in touch with who I was seemed to be through taking this leap. "Look, it's not like I'm abandoning my whole life here," I said, leaning forward, trying to make him see. "I just want a year to explore, to see if there's more out there. I've been saving for this for a long time. I'm not asking you to understand everything. I just need your support." Jake was silent, his hands folded tightly in front of him. I could see him thinking, wrestling with his own feelings. Finally, he said, "I know you want my support, but I just can't. You're making a huge mistake. I don't think you're going to find whatever it is you're looking for out there. And I don't want to see you throw away everything for nothing." That stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd expected him to be cautious, maybe even skeptical, but not this cold. I swallowed, trying not to let the hurt show. "Jake, I'm not asking you to agree with me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I thought you'd at least try to see where I'm coming from. I need this. For me. And if it doesn't work out, then fine. I'll come back, and maybe I'll realize you were right. But if I don't go, I'll never know." He looked down, jaw clenched. "And what if you come back with nothing? What then?" I shrugged, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. "Then at least I'll know I tried. Isn't that worth something?" He didn't respond, just stared at his hands, deep in thought. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the air thick with tension. Part of me wanted to shake him, to make him understand. And another part of me wanted to drop everything, give up on the whole plan, and just stay in this life, the safe one we'd built together side by side. But I couldn't do that. Not anymore. Finally, he looked up, his eyes softening, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something. Maybe understanding, maybe just resignation. "I don't know if you'll find what you're looking for," he said quietly. "But I guess I don't get to decide that for you." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't approval, but it was something. A recognition that this was my decision, my life. "So, are we okay?" I asked, hesitant. He sighed, a sad sort of smile tugging at his lips. "I guess we are. Doesn't mean I think you're making the right call, but I get that you feel like you need to make it." We both sat back, each processing in our own way. I wanted to support his excitement even, but I knew that might never happen. And maybe I'd come back in a year, find out he'd been right all along, and end up right back where I started. Or maybe I'd find a new path, one that finally felt like mine. Leaving meant risking my friendship with Jake, though I didn't want to admit it. He was my closest friend, my anchor, and yet here I was tugging away from the shore, determined to drift into unknown waters. Part of me hoped he'd understand someday, that he'd forgive me for needing something he couldn't give. As I left the bar that night, the weight of my decision settled over me, and I wondered if I was being selfish, putting my needs above our friendship, risking the person who'd been there for me through everything. The guilt lingered, heavy and unshakable. So, I'm sitting here, ticket in hand, wondering if I'm doing the right thing. My sister Lily has always been the golden child. Growing up, she was the straight-A student, the athlete, the one everyone looked up to. I was proud of her, truly. She went on to become a high-powered lawyer, and I stayed local, working as a graphic designer and freelancing. We've always been close, and despite her busy life, she's the type who would drop everything to help a friend or family member in need. About a year ago, Lily decided she wanted to buy her own place. She'd been renting in a pricey area, and I knew this was a big deal for her. She'd been saving for years, skipping vacations, and avoiding big purchases to finally make it happen. She found a small but beautiful condo, close to her office, with an amazing view. When she invited me over for a tour, she was so excited, practically buzzing with pride. I'd never seen her so happy. Then, after we had a glass of wine to celebrate, she told me about her plan to flip the condo for a profit after a year or two. She had it all mapped out: buy, renovate, and sell once the market climbed a bit higher. It sounded ambitious, but very Lily. She always has a plan and a backup for everything. But as she talked, something gnawed at me. Real estate wasn't my field, but I had friends who'd lost a lot of money trying to flip properties without really understanding the risks. Plus, she was planning to max out her credit cards to cover the renovations, relying on the idea that the sale price would more than pay it back. As I listened, I could feel the warning bells going off in my head. I wanted to tell her to maybe think about staying put for a few years instead of banking on a quick resale. I kept quiet, but the worry lingered long after I left her place that night. Over the next month, I watched as she plunged into renovations. She poured herself into every detail, from the custom cabinetry to the designer bathroom tiles. And sure, I thought the place looked amazing, but I kept feeling like she was underestimating how much it was all going to cost her. One night, she called me, frustrated because the budget was already going over by thousands and the contractor had found issues with the plumbing that required even more repairs. She laughed it off, saying, "Well, it'll all be worth it once I sell this place for a nice profit." Finally, I couldn't keep my mouth shut any longer. I knew how much this condo meant to her, but I also knew she was putting herself in a tight spot with these renovations. She was counting on a perfect scenario where everything went smoothly and the market would be up when she was ready to sell. I was so nervous about saying anything, but I couldn't let her get in over her head without at least trying to help. So, I took her out for coffee and cautiously brought it up. "Lily, I know you're doing amazing things with the place, but I wanted to ask if you're sure you're okay with the expenses. It's just flipping a place this fast, especially in this market, might be more of a risk than you're used to. Maybe it would be worth staying a couple of years to let it appreciate." She stared at me for a moment, a look of surprise crossing her face. "You don't think I know what I'm doing?" she asked a bit sharply. "No, that's not it at all," I said quickly. "I think you're doing an incredible job. I just worry that this could become a lot to handle, you know? It's a lot of pressure to make it all back so quickly." She shook her head, giving me a small, tight smile. "I've done my research. It's going to work out fine. I don't need you to worry about me." I could feel myself getting flustered, but I pushed on, hoping I could find the right words. "I know you have everything planned out, but even the best plans sometimes need flexibility. I just don't want you to end up stretched too thin financially. You've worked so hard to get here, and I don't want you to feel trapped if things don't go exactly as planned." She sighed, setting her coffee down a little harder than necessary. "Look, I appreciate that you're concerned, but honestly, I didn't ask for your advice. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, and I know what I'm doing. Maybe you should focus on your own finances before telling me how to handle mine." That stung. I felt my face flush, and I didn't know how to respond. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell her I was only trying to look out for her, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. She wasn't listening, not really. In her mind, I was just the little sister meddling in things that weren't my business. After an awkward silence, she looked at her watch and said she had to go. She gave me a quick, half-hearted hug and walked out without another word. I sat there in the cafe, staring into my untouched coffee, feeling a strange combination of guilt and hurt. I tried to tread so carefully, to say what I did in a way that wouldn't come off as judgmental. But somehow, I'd still managed to upset her. In the weeks that followed, things were tense between us. Our once frequent calls became sporadic, and when we did talk, she kept our conversations surface level. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was, that I hadn't meant to undermine her. But every time I thought about reaching out, I hesitated, afraid I'd only make things worse. A few months later, I found out through our mom that Lily had ended up having to take out a personal loan to cover some of the renovation costs that had spiraled out of control. Apparently, the renovations had stretched on longer than she'd expected, and the debt was starting to weigh on her. I wanted to reach out to her, to offer my support, or even help her brainstorm some options, but something held me back. Part of me feared she'd throw my "I told you so" in my face, even though I'd never actually say it. I just wanted to help, but it felt like I'd only end up making her feel worse. Now, we're still not back to where we were. Our relationship feels strained, and I keep wondering if I should have just stayed quiet, let her handle things on her own. I thought I was doing the right thing by speaking up, but maybe I was wrong to assume she wanted my help. I wanted to protect her, but I don't know if I actually did anything useful, or if I just ended up pushing her away.